Welcome to the Guido Rahr Senior Tenderfoot Forest Reserve. Over the years, the Rahrs acquired several thousand acres of land in the Upper Peninsula, which is just across the border here, maybe a few hundred yards to the north, and all the land in Wisconsin that the Conservancy owns. Since then, they have sold land to Notre Dame, and with our purchase in 2005, all the lands, with the exception of a cabin they own on Tenderfoot, are publicly owned or in conservation ownership. Why the Nature Conservancy was interested in this property, it was two reasons. One of them, there's over 4 miles of undeveloped wild lake shoreline on the property. The other aspect is really unique. There's about 500 acres of our 970 that are true old growth. The Rahrs never cut the land. Some of these trees date back into the 1700s. So what I also wish you could hear on this is the birds that are calling in the, right now. And what's interesting about old growth is that there are species that aren't like obligate to old growth, but there are species that depend on older forests, like Blackburnian warblers, northern parulas, that need that different canopy, mixed conifer and deciduous trees. And those are species that are somewhat declining across the north, but in places like this, they can still find a home. So now we're gonna walk down the trail and we'll stop at interesting parts, show you some of the undeveloped lakeshore and the unique aspects of the old growth. So this morning I'm joined by naturalist and author John Bates, and he'll help tell the story of the property, and by Rod Sharka, who's a volunteer stewardship naturalist for us here at the Tenderfoot property.
Just to set the stage for how important this particular site is, it's somewhere around 500 acres of old growth hemlock hardwoods here at Tenderfoot. And that's about as big a site as we have left in the state. There's another site that's of relatively equal size, but that means we have less than 1 square mile of hemlock hardwoods in any given site in the entire state. Growing on top of this nurse log are a slew of young yellow birch and a number of smaller, hard to see from where you are, young hemlocks. And the characteristic that makes this such a great nurse log is all this moss, which occupies these decaying logs rather rapidly and holds moisture throughout the summer, so that these young seedlings during a drought period will not get dried out and die. Neither yellow birch nor hemlock can tolerate the drying of the very young seedlings. So this is very important to allow trees to fall over and die in order to have maximum germination of a whole new constellation of young trees. When a big grandmother hemlock like this falls down, it could be 90 to 100 feet long, and often in an old growth forest you will see straight lines of trees growing, and you'll think someone planted those, but no, that's that nurse log slowly decomposing over time, and all of those young trees that got started on that nurse log that finally is decomposed entirely, now they've come up. That's one of the visual attributes of an old growth forest. A common group of plants that you'll see in old growth are lycopodiums, also called club mosses. They're an evergreen, but only get, so these are not young pines or spruces growing up. They will only get this tall, and a number of these species can get very, very old. They can be a century old just as well as a big hemlock or sugar maple.
At several of the Nature Conservancy properties across the state, we offer opportunities to honor loved ones or family members by naming trails after them.
So I've been a stewardship volunteer here for 13 years now, and among my duties have been mowing and keeping the trails open, but also invasive control work. And 3 years ago we decided to build this boardwalk because the trail around Mirror Lake went through a cedar swamp here, and it was always flooded, so we had to do something about that. It was impassable.
We're standing next to Mirror Lake, an undeveloped wild lake here on the Tenderfoot property. Somewhere maybe around 37 acres in surface area and 47 feet deep, something on that order. More important than those statistics is the fact it's undeveloped and wild. It's a shoreline that has no invasive species and a water body that has no invasive species. And the importance of that is as a benchmark, as kind of the gold standard for what nature intended our lakes to look like, so that in our management of lakes throughout Wisconsin, we'll know what to compare our management to try to emulate the natural world as closely as we can. When we walk on a site like this, we talk an awful lot about the science of the site, of the different species, about the ecosystem as a whole. But really what's also equally important is simply the beauty of a place. And this place has extraordinary beauty. John Muir wrote that we need beauty as well as bread. And I think that's so true. Why do we have pictures of the natural world in our homes? Why do we have so many windows as possible we can put in our houses so we can look outdoors? Because we crave beauty. And in a place like this, it is rife with beauty. It's a place that can take you to your knees because it is so beautiful.
Well, so it's hard to follow that. So I'd like to end this virtual tour by thanking John and Rod for accompanying me to Tenderfoot Lake, for Rebecca for filming, and to all of you whose support makes it possible for us to protect these amazing places like Tenderfoot.